I got divorced and moved to Europe 3 months ago. And last weekend, on the exact day my ex-husband married someone else, he called me crying like his lungs were collapsing. What happened next didn't just feel insane. It felt like the universe reached into my life, grabbed the old wound I'd been trying to heal, and ripped it open just to prove it still had teeth. I was sitting alone in my small apartment in Zurich, watching rain slide down the glass in slow, quiet lines. The place was still half empty, moving boxes stacked like unfinished thoughts. One chair, a mattress from IKEA I'd built by myself, with 3 screws left over like a joke I didn't understand. But it was mine. The silence was mine. The peace I had fought for was mine. 12 years of marriage, signed away with a pen that didn't even shake. 3 months since Evan Chen, my ex-husband, smiled while we dismantled our life like he was signing an autograph for a stranger. 3 months since I took a software consulting job in Switzerland and told myself distance would do what time hadn't, make the memories quieter. My phone lay face down on the windowsill, like I could keep the past from finding me if I didn't look at it. But the past is patient. That Saturday evening in Zurich meant afternoon in San Francisco, meaning the wedding was happening right then. Evan in a suit again. Evan saying vows again. Evan calling it his second chance, like our marriage had been a rehearsal. I flipped my phone over. Dozens of notifications, mostly Instagram tags from people who thought I'd want to see it. I opened the app, the way you open a letter you already know will ruin your day. There they were on the Grand Plaza steps, Evan and the bride, Brenda Collins, laughing like nothing in the world had ever broken them. 200 guests behind them. 200 witnesses to my replacement. I scrolled. Ceremony, reception, cake cutting. And then I froze. Not at the cake, but at a comment buried like a landmine. Beautiful ceremony. I wonder if the bride's husband knows she's on her honeymoon. My throat tightened. Husband. Present tense. And before I could even process that word, my screen lit up with an incoming call. Evan. On his wedding day. Crying. Tell me something, he choked out the second I answered. Did you know about Brenda? Did you know? And in that moment, standing alone in a foreign city with rain at my window and my heart in my throat, I realized my divorce wasn't the end of the story. It was the calm before something much uglier. If you had met me a year ago, you would have thought I was the kind of woman who had everything neatly labeled. A stable marriage, a stable career, a stable life. I was 34, a software consultant with a brain trained to solve problems the way other people solve crossword puzzles, quietly, efficiently, without drama. I like structure, clear contracts, clean logic. Even my emotions used to feel like something I could debug if I stared at them long enough. That was before my marriage taught me a brutal truth. Some things don't break with a loud crash. They break with a slow, polite smile. Evan and I met in our early 20s, right after college, at a friend's birthday party in San Francisco. I remember the first thing I noticed wasn't his face, it was his hands. Long fingers, calm movements, the kind of hands that looked like they belonged to someone dependable. He offered me a drink when I was hovering near the kitchen island, pretending I wasn't awkward. He asked what I did. I told him software. He laughed and said, "That sounds intimidating." Then he leaned in, not flirtatious, curious. "Do you like it?" I said yes, I meant it, I still do. He told me he worked in operations, project management at a mid-sized tech company. Not flashy, not ambitious in the way Silicon Valley worships ambition, but steady. He had this gentle way of talking that made you feel safe, like you could confess your ugliest thoughts and he'd just nod and help you carry them. Our relationship was simple at first. Dinners, weekend hikes, late-night drives with the windows down. The kind of love that grows quietly, like a plant you forget to measure until one day it's climbed the whole wall. When he proposed, it wasn't dramatic. No violinists, no crowds, just a small pier near the water at sunset. He was nervous. His voice cracked when he asked, and I remember thinking that nervousness was proof. Proof that he cared. Proof that he wasn't playing. I said yes, and for years we were fine. Not perfect, but fine in the way a lot of long marriages are fine. We built routines, shared bills, made plans, went to family gatherings, and laughed at jokes that weren't funny. We grew older beside each other. I was the one who handled most of the planning because that's what I do. I plan. Evan was the one who handled the emotional temperature of a room. He'd notice when I was tired before I said anything. He'd bring me tea. He'd put his hand on my back at crowded parties like an anchor. That's why, when things started to shift, I didn't recognize it as danger. It started small. Evan becoming oddly protective of his phone. Evan smiling at messages and then clearing his screen when I walked by. Evan suddenly working late, but coming home smelling like cologne he never wore for me. I told myself it was stress. I told myself marriages go through phases. I told myself I was being paranoid. And then there was Brenda. At the time, she was just a name. Evan would mention her in passing. Brenda from work. The way you mention a coworker you barely care about. He said she was helpful. A good listener. Someone who gets it. The first time I met her, it was at a company event Evan dragged me to. A networking mixer with overpriced wine and a room full of people pretending they weren't judging each other. Brenda was pretty in a polished way. Perfect teeth, confident posture, a laugh that landed exactly where she wanted it to. She shook my hand like she was already measuring my grip strength. "Oh, you're Daniel's wife," she said. "Daniel. Not my name," I corrected her automatically. "I'm Lena, Evan's wife." She blinked once, fast, then smiled wider. "Right, Lena, sorry. It was nothing. It should have been nothing." But I remember the way Evan stood just a little too close to her, the way his eyes lingered on her face like he was memorizing it, the way she looked at him like she owned a private version of him I had never seen. I didn't confront him that night. I didn't want to be the jealous wife at a corporate party. I didn't want to look insecure. And that is the cruel irony of being a woman who prides herself on maturity. You can talk yourself out of your own instincts with a vocabulary of reason. Over the next 2 years, Brenda became more than a name. She became a presence. She was the work friend who texted him at night, the support who understood him when I didn't, the person who, according to Evan, believed in his potential when I was too focused on the practical stuff. We fought more, not screaming fights. Evan wasn't a screamer. Ours were worse, quiet fights. The kind where someone is already halfway out the door, but they're still pretending they're inside the room. He started making comments that cut like paper. "You're always analyzing everything. You don't know how to just be happy. Brenda says you can't treat love like a checklist. Brenda says, Brenda says, Brenda says." And I remember the first time he said it, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Because I didn't marry Brenda. Why was Brenda in our marriage? Then came the day he asked for divorce. Not during a huge blowout. Not after a dramatic confession. He asked like he was ordering coffee. "We're not working," he said, sitting across from me at the dining table we'd eaten on for a decade. I think we both know it. My chest went tight. Is this because of her? He didn't even deny it properly. He just exhaled, tired, like I was exhausting him by asking. "Brenda makes me feel seen." And that sentence broke something in me that had been holding on by its fingernails. Because what he meant was, you didn't. The divorce papers came fast. Lawyers, meetings, asset division, signatures. And through all of it, Evan stayed eerily calm. Like he was relieved. Like he had already grieved the marriage while I was still living inside it. 3 weeks after the divorce finalized, I took the job in Zurich. People kept telling me it was brave. But the truth is, bravery wasn't what got me on that plane. It was survival. I needed air. I needed distance. I needed a place where no one knew me as Evan's ex-wife. I wanted a quiet life built from scratch. And for 3 months, it almost worked. Until the rain. Until Instagram. Until the comment that said husband in present tense. Until Evan called me crying on his wedding day and asked, "Did you know?" Like I was supposed to be the one holding the truth. There's a particular kind of dread that doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps. It settles into your bones quietly, disguising itself as anxiety, as overthinking, as you being too sensitive. That's what the months before the divorce felt like. Looking back from Zurich, 3 months removed, emotionally bruised but clearer, I can finally see the pattern I kept excusing. Back then, I didn't want to see it. Evan didn't suddenly become cruel. That would have been easier. Cruelty gives you permission to leave. Instead, he became distant in a way that made me doubt myself. He'd sit next to me on the couch, scrolling through his phone, smiling at something I wasn't allowed to know. When I asked what was funny, he'd say, "Just work stuff," and kiss my forehead like a consolation prize. He started treating my questions like accusations. "Why are you interrogating me? Can't I have friends? You're reading too much into everything." And every time he said it, I shrank a little. I stopped asking. I stopped pushing. I stopped trusting my instincts. Because women like me are taught that being reasonable is a virtue. Reasonable wives don't accuse. Reasonable wives don't snoop. Reasonable wives don't get jealous of coworkers. So when Evan started spending more time at the office and then at Brenda's apartment under the excuse of brainstorming sessions, I swallowed the knot in my chest and told myself I was being dramatic. "She's just someone who listens," he said once, almost impatient. "Not everything is about sex, Lena." That sentence lodged itself somewhere painful, because it implied that I was the one cheapening things by imagining intimacy where there was none. And yet, intimacy was exactly what they were building. Not physical at first, emotional, psychological, the most dangerous kind. Brenda became the person he vented to about me. I know that now. I didn't know it then. But I remember the way he'd come home with his frustrations already processed, the way arguments we hadn't finished somehow felt resolved, just not with me. He stopped asking for my opinion on decisions, stopped sharing plans, stopped needing me. And when I tried to talk about it, he'd sigh like I was asking him to explain gravity. "Can we not do this right now? Why do you always turn things into problems?" "I'm tired, Lena." I began to feel like an obstacle instead of a partner. Then came the family pressure. Evan's mother had always been polite in a distant, curated way. She never disliked me outright, but she never defended me either. At family dinners, she'd praise Brenda openly. "Oh, Brenda's so driven," she'd say casually. "She really understands the industry Evan's in." Understand. Like I didn't understand my own husband after 12 years. Once she said it directly to my face. "You know, Lena, men like Evan need inspiration. Someone who pushes them." I remember smiling tightly and saying, "I push him plenty." She laughed, not unkindly, dismissively. That was the moment I realized something had already shifted in the family narrative. I was no longer the wife, I was the woman who didn't measure up. Friends followed suit. Mutual friends started inviting Evan places without me, or inviting me separately, awkwardly, like they were managing a divorce that hadn't happened yet. Brenda, meanwhile, slipped effortlessly into his world. She came to company events. She knew his colleagues' names. She laughed at the right jokes. And I was the one apologizing for being a little off lately. The night Evan finally asked for the divorce, it wasn't explosive. It was quiet, surgical. He said we'd grown apart. He said he needed something different. He said he didn't want to hurt me anymore by pretending. And when I asked, voice shaking, heart already cracking, if Brenda was the reason, he didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. That silence was worse than a confession, because it told me everything I needed to know and everything I wasn't ready to accept. 3 months later, in Zurich, standing by my rain-streaked window, staring at a wedding photo that shouldn't have existed, I finally understood what I had been sensing all along. I hadn't lost my marriage overnight. I'd been slowly replaced. And now, on the day Evan was supposed to be celebrating his second chance, something was unraveling so fast it made my chest tight. A deleted comment, a woman in a jade green dress, a present tense word that shouldn't exist, and Evan's voice breaking through the phone. "Did you know?" "No," but I was about to. The phone call didn't give me time to organize my thoughts. It cracked straight through them. "Lena," Evan said, his voice tight, raw, like he was pressing his hand against a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. "I need you to tell me something. Did you know about Brenda? Did you know?" I stood frozen in the middle of my apartment, the rain still tapping against the window, like it was trying to get my attention. "Know what?" I asked carefully. "Evan, I'm in Switzerland. I've been here for 3 months. There was a sharp inhale on the other end. Then silence. Then soft, panicked swearing under his breath. My stomach dropped. "What happened?" I asked. But he had already hung up. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone like it had betrayed me. My heartbeat felt loud in my ears. Too loud. I thought about the comment again. I wonder if the bride's husband knows she's on her honeymoon. Husband. Not ex-husband, not former. Husband. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I had spent 12 years married to a man who taught me what denial feels like. I wasn't going to make that mistake again. I opened my laptop. If Evan was panicking, there was a reason. And if Brenda Collins had a secret, it wouldn't be buried very deep. I typed her name into Google. Brenda Collins, San Francisco, tech startup. Her LinkedIn came up first. Clean, impressive, motivational quotes about leadership and resilience. Her company website followed. Sleek design, press releases, photos of her at conferences smiling like a woman with nothing to hide. I kept scrolling. Page 2, page 3, and then a society column from 2 years ago. A fundraising gala. I clicked. The photo loaded slowly, and when it did, my breath caught. Brenda stood in a silver gown, her arm wrapped intimately around a man in a tuxedo. They were smiling at the camera with the practiced ease of a couple used to being photographed. The caption read, Brenda Collins, CEO of NextCore Technologies, with husband Jason Collins at the annual Innovation Gala. Husband, Jason Collins. My hands started shaking. I clicked the image, then another, then another. Wedding announcement 4 years ago. Holiday photos, charity events. 5 years of a marriage that had existed quietly, publicly, confidently. There was no mention of divorce, no separation announcement, no legal filings I could find. I searched court records. Nothing. Then I found Jason's Facebook page. His profile photo had been updated 3 weeks ago. Jason stood in what looked like the same exposed brick apartment Brenda used to invite Evan to. He was smiling, wearing a wedding ring. Brenda Collins was still married, which meant my ex-husband had just married a married woman. The fairy tale wedding, plastered all over Instagram, wasn't just a betrayal. It was a lie built on fraud. My phone buzzed. A text from Evan. Please call me back. I stared at the screen. There had been a time, many times, when I had begged him for a single please. During the divorce. During the nights I asked him to stay. During the moments I tried to understand when he stopped choosing me. Now the word sat there, fragile and desperate. I could have ignored it. I had every right to. But here's the truth about being the person who was left. You know exactly what it feels like to stand alone in the wreckage, realizing the life you believed in was built on something false. And you get a choice. You can become the thing that hurt you. Or you can be better than that. I typed back slowly. I'll call you in 10 minutes. But first, what did the guest say? The reply came almost instantly. She said Brenda's husband wants her wife back. Just like that, the story I thought I knew collapsed into something far more dangerous. I called him. Lena, Evan answered before the first ring finished. Just my name, breathless, broken. Tell me exactly what happened, I said. He swallowed hard. The wedding was perfect, he started, like he needed to convince himself. Everything went exactly as planned. The ceremony, the vows, Brenda cried, I cried, everyone cried. I closed my eyes. Go on. The reception was in the Grand Plaza Ballroom. 200 people, champagne that cost more per bottle than our entire wedding bar back then. He laughed once, hollow. Everything was perfect until the speeches. My chest tightened. Her father spoke first, then my mom, then the best man. Normal stuff. His voice wavered. And then, this man stood up. What man? I didn't know him. I'd never seen him before. He wasn't on the guest list. A cold certainty settled into my spine. What did he look like? Evan hesitated. Late 60s, silver hair, dark green suit. Calm. Too calm. I pictured the woman in the jade dress from the photo. The knowing expression. He walked to the microphone like he belonged there, Evan continued. Smiled and said, Evan's voice dropped to a whisper. I'm Robert Anderson. I'm here on behalf of my son-in-law, Jason Collins, who couldn't attend today because he's home recovering from pneumonia. Jason asked me to congratulate Brenda and to remind her that he'll be waiting when she returns from her honeymoon, as her husband of 4 years. The silence after that must have been unbearable. What did Brenda do? I asked softly. She froze, Evan said, like someone unplugged her. I've never seen a face lose color that fast. And then? She tried to laugh it off, said it was a prank, said someone was being cruel. His breath hitched. But Robert wasn't done. My grip tightened around the phone. He pulled out his phone, said Jason was on video call, asked if the guests would like to meet him. I didn't need Evan to finish. She ran, he said. She just ran, out of the ballroom, left me standing there, 200 people staring. I leaned against the window, the glass cold against my back. What did you do? I asked. I stood there, he whispered, like an idiot. Robert kept talking, said Jason had suspected for a year, hired a private investigator, had evidence, texts, photos, marriage license fraud. Fraud. Evan was shaking now. I could hear it. I locked myself in the bridal suite, he finished. My mom's downstairs trying to manage the chaos. Brenda's family is screaming about lawsuits. I don't know what to do. I was quiet for a long moment. Then I asked the question that had been sitting between us like an exposed wire. Evan, did you know she was married? No, he said immediately. Too quickly. God, no. I was at her apartment all the time. I met her friends, her co-workers. There was no sign of a husband. There are always signs, but I didn't say that. Instead, I asked, why did you call me? The silence stretched. I don't know, he said finally, voice cracking. You were the first person I thought of. That sentence hit harder than any insult he'd ever thrown at me. Because when everything collapsed, when the truth detonated in front of 200 witnesses, he reached for the woman he had already broken. And for the first time since the divorce, I understood something clearly. I was no longer inside the wreckage. I was standing outside it, and that meant I had a choice. For a few seconds after Evan finished speaking, neither of us said anything. I could hear his breathing, ragged, uneven, like he was trying not to drown on the other end of the line. I stood there in my quiet Zurich apartment, surrounded by half-built furniture and unopened boxes, feeling the strange dissonance of being both far away and uncomfortably close. 3 months ago, I would have collapsed under this call. 3 months ago, his pain would have become my emergency. But something had shifted, not into cruelty, not into indifference, into clarity. "Evan," I said gently, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded, "where are you right now?" "The bridal suite," he answered. "I locked the door. I didn't know where else to go." The image was almost surreal. Him in a rented room filled with white roses and discarded tuxedo parts, sitting alone in the ruins of a wedding that legally shouldn't exist. "I'm not asking this to be cruel," I said carefully. "I need to know. Did Brenda ever mention being separated, even once?" He hesitated. "She said things were complicated," he admitted, "that her last relationship ended badly, that she didn't like talking about it." Complicated. That word again. The same one he used on me when he didn't want to explain Brenda. I exhaled slowly, grounding myself. "Evan," I said, "if she had been legally separated for 2 years, someone would have known. Her parents, her coworkers, her investors. You don't hide a marriage at that level unless there's something to hide." He didn't answer, and that told me he was already beginning to see it. "I feel so stupid," he whispered. "I blew up my life for someone who was lying to me the entire time." The irony sat heavy between us. Part of me wanted to say welcome to the club. Part of me wanted to scream. But the louder emotion, the one that surprised me, was sadness. Not for him losing Brenda. For him losing himself. "Right now," I said, shifting into the voice I use when a system crashes and panic makes things worse, "you don't need answers. You need to stabilize." He sniffed. "How?" "First," I said, "stop answering Brenda's calls. Block her number for tonight." "What? Why?" "Because nothing she says right now will be truthful," I said calmly. "She's in damage control mode. Anything she tells you will be about saving herself, not helping you." He was quiet, then I heard the faint sound of typing. "Okay," he said, "done." "Second," I continued, "ask your mother to find out everything she can about Robert Anderson and Jason Collins. If someone showed up with evidence and a private investigator, this didn't happen impulsively." "Okay." "Third," I said, softer now, "get out of the tux. Order room service, drink some water, and let yourself feel how bad this is." "I don't want to feel it," he said, voice breaking. "I know," I said, "but it's going to catch you either way. Better to face it tonight than let it eat you alive later." He let out a small, broken laugh. "When did you get so wise?" I leaned my forehead against the cool glass of the window. "Switzerland puts wisdom in the chocolate," I said lightly. He laughed again, still fractured, but real. Then his voice softened. "I'm sorry," he said, "for everything. For how I ended things. For not being honest when I should have been." The apology landed differently than I expected. It didn't reopen the wound. It closed something. "Evan," I said gently, "tonight isn't about fixing the past. Survive the night first. Apologies can wait." He was quiet again. "Will you answer if I call you later?" he asked. The question was raw, vulnerable, fair. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Ask me tomorrow." "Fair," he whispered. Before we hung up, I added one last thing, something practical, something he hadn't considered yet. "When you talk to your mom," I said, "ask her to find out whether Brenda's company is publicly traded." There was a pause. "And if it is?" he asked. "Then ask what happens to a stock price when the CEO's personal life turns into a fraud scandal at her own wedding." I heard his breath catch. If Brenda had hidden a marriage to protect her business, then having it exposed publicly, especially in front of investors, wouldn't just destroy her relationship. It would destabilize her entire empire. "I'll find out," he said quietly. "Good," I replied. "Now go try to sleep." We hung up. I stood there in my empty apartment, the rain still falling, the city lights of Zurich blinking on one by one. Somewhere outside, couples were having dinner. Somewhere else, someone was celebrating a wedding that actually meant something. And somewhere in San Francisco, Evan was taking off his wedding tuxedo and realizing the life he'd chosen was built on a lie. I opened my laptop again, not because I needed revenge, but because clarity had always been my way forward. And what I was about to find would explain everything. I didn't open my laptop with revenge in mind. That matters. Revenge is emotional. What I needed was information. I searched the way I always do when something doesn't add up, methodically, quietly, without assuming the conclusion. NextCore Technologies. That was Brenda's company, the one she'd built her identity around, the reason she was always traveling, the excuse for late nights, missed holidays, and unexplained absences. The website loaded quickly. Sleek branding, press releases, growth charts, awards. Brenda Collins listed everywhere as CEO and majority shareholder. Then I found the ticker symbol, publicly traded. My stomach tightened. I clicked through quarterly reports, investor presentations, governance filings. Names scrolled past. Board members, early investors, strategic partners. And then I saw it. A familiar surname. Anderson. Robert Anderson. Primary investor. Board seat. Special voting rights. I leaned back in my chair slowly. The jade green dress, the calm confidence, the way he'd walk to that microphone like he owned the room. He did. I dug deeper. Robert Anderson wasn't just an investor. He was the founder of Anderson Industries, one of the largest tech manufacturing firms in the Pacific Rim. Brenda's company wasn't independent. It was funded, propped up, protected by her husband's father. Jason Collins wasn't just her spouse. He was the bridge between her company and the money that kept it alive. Everything clicked into place with a sickening elegance. Brenda hadn't just lied about being married. She had needed to stay married. If she divorced Jason, the funding disappeared. If the funding disappeared, control disappeared. And if control disappeared, so did her empire. So she'd done what desperate people do when they think they're smarter than consequences. She tried to have both. A husband on paper, a lover in reality, a wedding that shouldn't exist. And Evan, my ex-husband, had been the fantasy, the escape, the man who believed her because he wanted to. My phone buzzed. A text from Evan. Mom found it. NextCore is public. Investors were at the wedding. I closed my eyes. That exposure wasn't just personal humiliation. It was catastrophic. Block Brenda tonight. Let the professionals handle it, I typed back. Okay. A pause. Thank you for not being cruel. Cruelty would have been easy. But I remembered what it felt like to be abandoned when everything collapsed. I wouldn't become that person, not even for him. The next morning, Zurich time, I woke to 12 messages, all from Evan, time-stamped through the night. He'd done exactly what I told him not to do, think. He'd spiraled. He'd searched. He'd found Jason's Facebook photos, Christmas gatherings, family dinners, Brenda smiling beside a man she told Evan didn't exist. At 4:12 a.m., he texted, "I'm so stupid, I told myself I was trading up." That sentence stayed with me longer than the rest, because that was the lie underneath everything. The lie that had justified leaving me. The lie that had made cruelty feel reasonable. He didn't leave because our marriage was broken beyond repair. He left because he believed he was upgrading. At 7:15 a.m., my phone rang. "Did you sleep?" I asked when I answered. 2 hours, Evan said. His voice sounded raw, like his throat hurt from holding back too much. I called Robert Anderson. That surprised me. And? He answered like he was expecting it, Evan said quietly. He was polite, calm. He explained everything. I listened. Brenda and Jason married 4 years ago. She was just launching NextCore. Robert invested $2 million personally, seed funding. But the agreement was informal. My jaw tightened. Meaning? Meaning, Evan said. It was never written as stay married or lose funding. But everyone understood the expectation. Of course they did. When did it go wrong? I asked. About 2 years in, Evan replied. NextCore started growing fast. Brenda was traveling constantly. Jason's a trauma surgeon. 80-hour weeks. They barely saw each other. Marriage turned into a formality. But not a divorce, I said. No, he agreed. Because by then, the company was worth tens of millions, and Robert owned 30%, plus voting rights. If Brenda divorced Jason, Robert could force her out. I exhaled slowly. And instead of choosing, I said, she chose both. Yes, and you, I added gently, were the collateral damage. He didn't argue. She's done this before, Evan said. Not marriage, but affairs. Robert told me Jason knew, tolerated it. Divorce wasn't an option. That part made my stomach turn. So why now? I asked. Because she crossed a line, Evan said. Affairs were one thing. Bigamy was another. Illegal, public, impossible to clean up. Silence settled between us. She didn't want the wedding to happen, Evan said. Jason tried to stop it quietly. Called the venue, called Brenda, called me. I closed my eyes. Did she call you? I asked. Yes, he said softly. I didn't recognize the number. I ignored it. If he had answered that call, everything would have changed. Instead, the truth arrived with a microphone and 200 witnesses. By Monday morning, San Francisco time, the fallout exploded. Evan didn't tell me this. The news did. Forbes, Bloomberg, TechCrunch, NextCore, CEO exposed. Marriage fraud allegations rock Silicon Valley. Stock down 23% in after-hours trading. Investors furious. Board scrambling. Robert Anderson issuing a brief statement about reviewing all business relationships. Brenda's name was everywhere. Evan's wasn't. Not yet. And then my phone rang again. Tell me you've seen the news, Evan said immediately. I've seen it. How bad is it? I explained, carefully, factually, how the narrative was forming. Brenda as the architect, Jason as the betrayed spouse, Evan as a deceived party. I don't feel deceived, Evan said bitterly. I feel humiliated. You can be both, I replied. There was anger in his voice now, sharp, clean, no longer panicked. I went through every message she ever sent me, he said. Every I love you, every promise. All of it was a lie. Yes, I said, and that hurts. I told myself you weren't ambitious enough, he continued, voice cracking, that Brenda was everything you weren't. I stayed silent. And I was right, he finished. She was everything you weren't. A liar, a fraud, a person who needed 2 lives to feel whole. That was the moment his narrative finally broke. Not into regret, into accountability. You were a good wife, he said quietly. Not perfect, but honest. You showed up, and I threw that away. I didn't rush to comfort him. I didn't need to. I'm not helping you to punish myself, I said calmly. I'm helping because I'm already past this. Don't confuse the two. I know, he said, and that somehow makes it worse. We ended the call with practical plans, lawyers, statements, boundaries. When I hung up, I stood at my window again, watching Zurich wake up. 3 months ago, I would have been shattered by this. Now, I felt something steadier. The sense that I had survived the worst part already, and that everyone else was just now reaching it. There's a moment after chaos when everything goes quiet, but not peaceful. It's the silence after an explosion, when your ears are ringing and your body hasn't caught up to the fact that you're still standing. That's where I landed. The news cycle moved fast. Brenda's name flooded the internet. Analysts dissected timelines. Commentators argued about ethics, legality, optics. Strangers who had never met any of us spoke with certainty about who was evil, who was naive, who was complicit. And for the first time since the divorce, I wasn't invisible anymore. I was adjacent. My phone buzzed constantly, not with sympathy, but with curiosity. Mutual friends, old colleagues, people who had quietly drifted away when Evan left me for something better. Are you okay? Did you know? Wow. Guess karma's real, huh? Each message felt like a finger poking at a bruise. I stopped replying, because beneath the clarity, beneath the control, there was a deeper feeling I hadn't prepared for. Grief. Not for Evan, for the version of myself that had believed she was enough. That night, Zurich felt unbearably still. I sat on the floor of my apartment, back against the couch I hadn't finished assembling, staring at the screws on the coffee table. My chest felt tight in a way that wasn't panic, just heaviness. I kept replaying old moments. The night Evan told me I was too analytical. The way I'd apologized for asking questions, the times I'd chosen silence over self-respect because I didn't want to be difficult. I had survived the betrayal, but I hadn't yet forgiven myself for participating in my own erasure. That realization hurt more than anything Brenda or Evan had done, because it meant the damage wasn't just external, it was internal. I poured myself a drink, not to numb, but to sit with the ache. The therapist I'd started seeing in Zurich had warned me this moment would come. Relief comes first, she'd said. Then grief, because clarity removes denial, and denial is cushioning. She was right. The truth had removed the cushioning. And suddenly I could feel everything. The loneliness, the years of shrinking, the quiet belief that love had to be earned by being easier, smaller, more agreeable. My phone lit up again. Evan. I let it ring. For the first time since this all started, I didn't have the capacity to be strong for someone else. A minute later, a text came through. I'm losing everything. My reputation, my friends. I don't know who I am without her. I stared at the words. 3 months ago, I would have rushed to reassure him. Told him he'd be okay. That identity rebuilds. That loss isn't the end. Now I set the phone down without replying. Not because I didn't care. Because I finally cared about myself enough to stop bleeding on command. That night I cried. Not neatly, not quietly. I cried the way you do when you've been holding your breath for years, and finally realize you're allowed to exhale. I cried for the woman who stayed when she should have questioned more, for the wife who thought loyalty would be rewarded, for the self I abandoned to keep a marriage alive that was already dead. And at the lowest point, sitting on my kitchen floor with the lights off, I admitted something that felt shameful but honest. Part of me had needed this disaster. Not Brenda's humiliation, not Evan's collapse, but the proof. Proof that I hadn't been imagining things. Proof that I hadn't been not enough. Proof that the story Evan told himself to leave me was built on fantasy, not fact. That realization didn't feel like victory. It felt like standing at the bottom of a deep well, finally understanding how far I'd fallen, and knowing there was no one left to blame but myself for the climb ahead. And yet something shifted. Not upward, inward. Because at rock bottom, there was one undeniable truth. I was still here, still intact, still capable of choosing differently. I wiped my face, stood up, and opened the window. Cold air rushed in. It burned. And it woke me up. The turning point didn't arrive with fireworks. It arrived quietly, the way real decisions usually do, without drama, without witnesses, without the need for anyone else's permission. It was the morning after the night I cried on the kitchen floor. Sunlight spilled into my apartment through the narrow gap between the curtains. Zurich looked the same as it always did, orderly, calm, indifferent to my internal chaos. And that was the point. The world hadn't ended. Only a story had. I made coffee stronger than usual and sat at the small table I'd finally finished assembling. The screws were all there this time. No leftovers. I picked up my phone. Evan had texted again in the early hours. I don't know how to do this without you. I read it once, then again, and something inside me clicked, not with anger, but with certainty. I typed back, "You're going to have to learn." He replied almost instantly, "Please don't shut me out." I stared at the word please. It used to pull me back into rooms I had already left. Not anymore. "I'm not shutting you out," I typed. "I'm stepping back. There's a difference." A pause. "Did I lose you forever?" I breathed in slowly. "You lost the version of me who existed to hold you up. The rest depends on what you do next." That was the moment. The moment I chose myself without theatrics. The moment I stopped being the safe landing for someone who had jumped without checking the ground. Later that day, my therapist asked me a simple question. "What do you want now, Lena?" Not what I deserved. Not what would be fair. Not what would prove anything. What I wanted. The answer surprised me. "I want peace," I said. "And I want to know I can stand on my own without becoming cold." She smiled. "That's a good place to start." Over the next week, things continued to unravel. For Evan, for Brenda, for everyone still tangled in that mess. Brenda released a statement through her lawyer, carefully worded, emotionless, focused on misunderstandings and complex personal circumstances. The market didn't care. NextCore's stock kept sliding. The board initiated an internal review. Robert Anderson resigned his seat. The company survived, but smaller, weaker, publicly bruised. Evan, meanwhile, found himself socially radioactive. Friends distanced themselves. Work contacts stopped returning calls. The sympathy phase ended quickly. He called me once more, not crying this time. "Just empty. I don't recognize my life," he said. I didn't rush to fill the silence. "Then this is where you rebuild," I replied. "How did you do it?" he asked. I thought about Zurich, about therapy, about learning to sit with discomfort instead of running from it. I stopped asking who I was without someone else, I said, and started asking who I was when no one was watching. He was quiet. Then he said, "I don't know how to be that person." "You will," I answered, "or you won't. But either way, it's your work now." That was the last heavy conversation we had. After that, our contact became minimal, respectful, boundaried. And in that space, something unexpected happened. I began to feel lighter. I joined a local basketball group on Sundays. I made friends who didn't know my past. I started running along the lake in the mornings, letting my breath burn and my thoughts clear. I wasn't reinventing myself. I was returning to myself. One evening, as I walked home from work, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Lina Chen, this is Amanda Walsh, attorney for Jason Collins." My stomach tightened, but not with fear. "Yes," I replied. "How can I help?" "I'm calling because Brenda Collins has filed a civil lawsuit." There it was. The final attempt to rewrite reality. "She's alleging defamation, interference, and conspiracy," Amanda continued. "You're named as a co-defendant." I sat down on a bench by the river. "On what grounds?" I asked calmly. "On none that will hold up," she said, "but we need to respond." I closed my eyes. Brenda was still trying to control the narrative, still trying to make herself the victim. But this time, I wasn't inside the blast radius. I was standing on solid ground. And for the first time since all of this began, I felt ready to let the truth do what it always does when you stop protecting lies. The lawsuit landed exactly the way lies usually do: loud, messy, and desperate. Brenda wasn't trying to win. She was trying to delay the truth. Her filing accused multiple people of a coordinated effort to destroy her reputation. Jason, his father, Evan, and me, somehow cast as a silent architect of chaos from 7,000 miles away. It would have been almost funny if it hadn't been so revealing. I sat at my kitchen table in Zurich, reading the complaint my lawyer forwarded me. 40-plus pages. Emotional language disguised as legal argument. Timelines that didn't line up. Claims that contradicted public records. My attorney didn't even sound concerned. "This is frivolous," she said calmly. "No serious firm would file this," which tells me Brenda is representing herself or using someone inexperienced. "What does that mean for me?" I asked. "It means it'll still cost you time and money," she replied honestly, "but it also means it'll collapse." Evan called me 10 minutes after he got the same notice. "She's suing us," he said, stunned. "All of us." "I know," I replied. "I've seen it." "This is insane. She's blaming you." I closed my eyes briefly. "This is what people do when accountability threatens them," I said. "They look for someone else to carry it." "But you didn't do anything," he said. "You were in Zurich." "Yes," I answered, "and the facts will reflect that." The next 6 weeks were tedious rather than dramatic. Emails, declarations, depositions scheduled across time zones, video calls at uncomfortable hours where I calmly repeated the same truth over and over. I had no contact with Brenda. I had no relationship with Jason. I did not orchestrate anything. I simply responded when someone called me in crisis. The truth doesn't need embellishment. It just needs consistency. Brenda, on the other hand, unraveled. Her filings grew more erratic, her accusations broader, her tone increasingly emotional. And courts don't reward emotion without evidence. When the judge finally issued the ruling, I read it slowly, not with satisfaction, with relief. The court finds that the plaintiff's complaint fails to state a claim upon which relief can be granted. The allegations are unsupported by fact and rely on speculation. The plaintiff appears to be attempting to hold defendants responsible for consequences resulting from her own fraudulent conduct. The final line landed like punctuation on a long sentence. Motion to dismiss is granted. Plaintiff is ordered to pay defendant's attorney fees. Brenda lost. Publicly. Legally. Finally. Evan called me that afternoon. "We won," he said quietly. "Yes," I replied, "we did." "Do you feel vindicated?" he asked. I considered the question carefully. Vindication would mean I still cared about her story, I said. "Mostly, I'm just glad it's over." There was a pause. "I'm not okay," he admitted, "but I think I'm finally being honest." "That's a start," I said. A few days later, he told me something that confirmed what I'd already sensed. His friends were gone. His social circle had collapsed. Even his family, once so quick to praise Brenda, had gone quiet. Not because they suddenly loved me, but because lies make everyone uncomfortable once they're exposed. Brenda disappeared from social media entirely. No statements, no explanations, just silence. And in that silence, the power she'd held evaporated. A week later, Evan asked me something unexpected. "Amanda, Jason's lawyer, wants to celebrate," he said. "She suggested the four of us meet. Neutral place. Closure." I laughed softly. "Closure?" I repeated. "Yeah," he said. "She thinks it might help." I thought about it longer than I expected. Not because I missed anyone, but because I realized something important. I wasn't afraid of seeing them anymore. "Only if it's for healing," I said finally, "not spectacle." "Agreed," he replied. We chose Lisbon. Warm, neutral, honest in its age and imperfection. When I arrived, I felt no dread, only curiosity. I met Evan first in the hotel bar. The hug was brief, awkward, respectful. He looked smaller, not weak, just stripped of illusions. Jason and his mother arrived together, calm, grounded, women who had endured something ugly without letting it rot them. Dinner was civil, then honest, then, unexpectedly, gentle. No accusations, no raised voices, no need to relive every detail. We acknowledged the truth. Brenda had lied. Each of us had been harmed. None of us had deserved it. And then we talked about something else, the future. When the evening ended, I walked back through the narrow streets of Lisbon, listening to music drift out of open windows, feeling the solid ground beneath my feet. Brenda was no longer the center of anything. She was a footnote, and that was the real fallout. The last morning in Lisbon arrived quietly. Sunlight crept through the thin curtains of my hotel room, warm and forgiving, the kind of light that makes you believe in second chapters. I stood on the small balcony, looking out at the river as it moved steadily toward the ocean, unconcerned with who had wronged whom, unconcerned with the past. That felt right. Downstairs, over coffee and bread that tasted like patience, we said our goodbyes. Not emotional, not heavy, just complete. Jason hugged me gently and said, "I'm sorry you were pulled into this." I smiled. "I'm not anymore." Evan lingered for a moment after the others left. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, "but I wanted to thank you. You didn't have to be kind." I looked at him, not with longing, not with resentment, but with something closer to neutrality. "Kindness wasn't for you," I said. "It was for me." He nodded, accepting that. When I flew back to Zurich, my apartment no longer felt temporary. I'd finished furnishing it, real furniture this time, no leftover screws. I had friends waiting for me, a job I enjoyed, a life that didn't require shrinking to be sustainable. And that's what this story is really about. Not revenge, not karma, not watching someone who hurt you fall apart. It's about what happens after. I learned that love doesn't ask you to abandon yourself to be chosen. That clarity is painful, but it's also merciful. That being alone is not the same as being unlovable. I learned that betrayal doesn't always come from villains. Sometimes it comes from people who are afraid, insecure, and chasing fantasies, instead of doing the work of being honest. And most importantly, I learned this. You don't heal by winning. You heal by leaving the battlefield. Brenda lost her narrative. Evan lost his illusions. And I gained myself back. That was the real ending. Not dramatic, not loud. Just solid. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough.